for allowing me to address these concerns.
I thank my friend from Louisiana. I want to put a name and a face on the environment that was created by our colleagues and by the previous administration in endangering the people. We talk about say his name. Say his name. Say the name of Jimmy Freezen. In San Antonio, a father of a young daughter, a veteran of the Marine Corps, Jimmy fell victim to the program that my friend from Louisiana just described. On May 4th of 2025, a mere 4 months ago, he was working as a security guard at a restaurant on the west side of San Antonio. The perpetrator, Wilmer Vladimir Ruiz Ortega, attempted to enter the bar, stopped by Jimmy to search for contraband. Jimmy identified a handgun, and it led to a struggle, which resulted in the suspect gaining control of it, firing it, and striking Jimmy at least once. Jimmy medically died on the scene but was revived. It struck him in the neck, leaving him with a spinal injury, along with a ruptured esophagus and vocal cords. He was in the ICU at San Antonio Military Medical Center with life-threatening injuries for months. Doctors say will never fully recover. The suspect is a 29-year-old illegal alien who entered the United States as a getaway. He was arrested in San Antonio and charged with DWI in 2020. He was let go on a personal recognizance bond, but failed to show up. The Bexar County DA downgraded the DWI. He pleaded guilty to obstructing a passageway, but violated the probation, got arrested again, was let go after posting $1,500 bond, failed to show up. He was arrested a fourth time in November of 24, sentenced to time served. He assaulted a girlfriend, fled the scene, and then the Bexar County DA, after shooting Jimmy, only pursued aggravated assault charges and set his bond at $200,000. He's not in jail. He was granted house arrest. A father, a veteran. His brother said Jimmy always put himself before others. Well, why do the people entrusted with securing our communities and enforcing the law not put Jimmy before the illegal alien who shouldn't have been here, should have been removed, shouldn't have been let out 5 times to carry out and perpetrate this kind of crime? The American people are asking, what happened? What happened to our country? How can a refugee from Ukraine, you remember when our colleagues waved all the Ukrainian flags on the House floor? Where were they today? Were they waving the Ukrainian flag to honor that young girl who was brutally murdered by a criminal released by a radical progressive, funded by radical progressives? They're nowhere to be found. MIA and the legacy media, also run by radical progressives, can't even bring it up, can't even put it on the television, don't dare to talk about it because it doesn't fit the narrative. The American people are sick of having their way of life that their forefathers fought and bled and died for, and that their brothers and sisters, moms and dads worked to build for them and to pass down to their kids. They're sick of having it ripped to shreds by people who don't give a rip about the rule of law or the Constitution or our way of life as God-fearing Americans who say that we put our trust in God right above the flag that those brave men and women wore into combat so that we could be here and live supposedly free. But we're unable to live free because we're not secure. And we're not secure because radical politicians and judges and NGOs are working furiously for political gain and political purposes to advance a radical Marxist ideology to undermine your security. It is a war on our way of life. It is a war on Western civilization itself. It is a war on the Constitution and the rule of law. Every day that goes by is another day in which the very things that built this country are under assault, including, I might add, and no doubt controversially, our belief in the Almighty God and His Son punished for our transgressions on the cross, and our collective belief in Him as a nation that built this country. And this country, and too many of its citizens that have turned its back on that truth. The fact is, the last point I'll make, those radical progressives with their remaking of America, with wide open borders. And open borders includes unfettered visas from all corners of the world, purposely driven for economic, political, and other purposes, but usually involving the buck and power. The people that are advancing Sharia law and advancing an Islamist political worldview directly and purposely in conflict with our Western values and our Constitution, it is a declaration of war on our way of life. In Houston just this weekend, an imam affiliated with the Nation of Islam was going around claiming to be patrolling Muslim-owned shops, telling them to stop selling alcohol, lottery tickets, because they violate Islamic law as communities in Texas are built up on large pieces of land, hundreds of acres, building up Muslim-only cities. This is purposeful. We had Nigel Farage and others testifying in the Judiciary Committee this past week. And I asked Mr. Farage if the advance of Islam and the importation of Sharia law is consistent with Western civilization, the Western civilization responsible for providing more peace and more prosperity and better living conditions and more freedom for more people than the world has ever seen? And his answer was, of course, no, it is not. And our friends across the pond can barely find themselves able to defend what little free speech remains on their island. When a comic comes to the United States, a comedian, and he makes a joke about transgenderism, I don't even know what the joke was, and he flies home to the UK, and he's arrested for hate speech, even as the parliament is advancing an Islamophobia bill. To which I say, who's going to win that war? Who's going to win that fight? We either believe and uphold the values of Western civilization or we don't. You can believe what you want. You can believe in God or not. You can go to church or not. But what you cannot do is advance a radical ideology deeply at odds, directly in conflict with, and purposely designed to undermine the very values that have built this nation and the advance of freedom around the world. Because at our core, our values are built on our faith. This nation is more likely to crumble under its own weight, its own errors, than it is by invasion. Unless we meet the moment, unless we stand up, unless we say, never again. Never again will we allow the power of government to be rained down upon the American people with mandates of masks and vaccines in the name of fear, in the name of health care. Never again will we allow open borders to trample our communities, endanger our citizens, filter dangerous narcotics into our communities. Never again will we allow the Chinese Communist Party to buy up our lands and to buy up our meatpacking facilities and to buy up our critical medical production companies. Never again will we allow our communities to get overrun with forced Marxist DEI and critical race theory ideology that undermines the very fabric of our communities. Never again will we allow the lawless, the dangerous criminal to be on our streets because a faraway judge or bureaucrat getting paid off by an NGO says so. Never again. Never again. This moment of reprieve, this moment of common sense in which President Trump is restoring a modicum of what we need to restore the rule of law and secure borders and enforcement of the law and removal of criminals, meeting resistance at every turn. Even this moment of reprieve in which the President Trump, is restoring common sense by eliminating DEI and CRT and all this stuff from our agencies and our Pentagon. Even this moment of reprieve is just that. A moment of reprieve from the march of the Marxist tyrannical ideology that is deeply at odds with our founding principles and who we are as a Judeo-Christian nation and as people who believe in something bigger and better for our kids and grandkids, rooted in the sacrifice of the millions who came before us. This reprieve must be met with the energy and the resolve of those who died before us. The men on the wall at the Alamo, the men who stormed the beaches at Normandy, the men on the fields at Lexington and Concord, the men and women who have answered the call to defeat terror, the men and women in blue who actually stand on that thin blue line even when they're abandoned. All of those who have answered the call deserve members of this body, members of the Senate, elected leaders across the country to risk even an ounce of what those men and women are willing to risk. Risk the election certificate upon which you hold like a death grip, I say to my colleagues, to do something bigger and better. Take this moment of reprieve and say, never again. Never again will we endanger our citizens. Never again with open borders. Never again with criminals on our streets. Never again with drugs. Never again with tyrannical mandates, vaccines stuck in the arm. Never again with radical ideologies and transgender ideology, politically motivated, harming our young women, undermining their advancement. Never again. Never again do we yield to the corporatists who gobble up our small businesses and undermine our way of life. Never again will we yield to ideology in the name of political expediency, but rather stand up and defend this, the greatest country that the world has ever known, without which people will be relegated to a world without the American dream, backed by the security and safety of the people willing to lay all on the line to defend it. With that, I thank my friend from Louisiana, I thank the Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. This is to notify you formally, pursuant to Rule 8 of the Rules of the House of Representatives, that I, Evelyn Cruz, District Director to the Honorable Nydia Velasquez, U.S. Representative for the 7th Congressional District of New York, have been served a third-party deposition subpoena in litigation before the Supreme Court of the State of New York. After consultation with the Office of General Counsel, I have determined that compliance with the subpoena is consistent with the privileges and rights of the House. Signed sincerely, Evelyn Cruz.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Thank the Speaker, the gentleman from Georgia. I move to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
During a speech on the House floor on Tuesday, Representative Chip Roy, Republican Texas, delivered an impassioned address that connected a violent attack in San Antonio to what he described as the failures of Democratic lawmakers, progressive prosecutors, and a broader disregard for the rule of law. Roy centered his remarks on the case of Jimmy Freezen, a Marine Corps veteran and father of a young daughter who was working as a security guard at a restaurant on San Antonio's west side on May 4, 2025. According to Roy, Freezen confronted a man attempting to enter the establishment with a handgun. A struggle broke out, and the suspect gained control of the weapon, firing at Freezen and striking him in the neck. The injuries left him with permanent damage, including a spinal injury, ruptured esophagus, and destroyed vocal cords. Though revived after being declared clinically dead, doctors have said Freezen will never fully recover. The suspect was identified as 29-year-old Wilmer Vladimir Ruiz Ortega, whom Roy described as an illegal immigrant who had entered the United States as a got away. Roy recounted Ruiz Ortega's long history of arrests and repeated releases by local authorities. He had previously been charged with DWI in 2020, released on a personal recognizance bond, and failed to appear in court. Prosecutors downgraded the charge to a lesser offense, and after more violations, additional arrests, and further failures to appear, he was repeatedly returned to the streets. Even after allegedly assaulting a girlfriend, Roy noted, he was granted bond and eventually sentenced to time served. Following the shooting of Freezen, prosecutors charged Ruiz Ortega with aggravated assault but set his bond at $200,000, allowing him to be placed on house arrest instead of remaining behind bars. Roy condemned what he characterized as a pattern of leniency by the Bihar County District Attorney's Office and accused progressive prosecutors of placing offenders' interests above public safety. Why do the people entrusted with securing our communities not put Jimmy before the illegal alien who shouldn't have been here? He asked, pointing to Freezen's service in the Marines and his devotion to his family. From there, Roy broadened his remarks into a sweeping critique of national policies, claiming that open borders, weak enforcement, and radical political ideologies were endangering American lives. He argued that progressive leaders and judges were deliberately undermining the Constitution and the nation's cultural foundation for political gain. He described these actions as part of what he called a war on our way of life and a direct assault on Western civilization. The congressman also tied the issue to cultural debates, warning about the advance of Sharia law, Marxist ideology, and what he labeled as radical progressive policies, including diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, critical race theory, and transgender rights. He cited examples from both the United States and abroad, claiming they showed how freedoms such as speech and religion were being eroded in favor of political correctness and ideological conformity. Throughout his speech, Roy repeated the phrase, "never again," as a rallying cry. He declared that never again should Americans allow open borders to endanger citizens, narcotics to flow into communities, criminals to walk free after repeated offenses, or mandates and lockdowns to curtail individual liberties. He extended that same warning to foreign influence, saying the United States must resist efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to purchase land and businesses and must stop corporate consolidation that threatens small businesses. Roy portrayed the current political moment as a brief reprieve, in his words, a pause provided by former President Donald Trump's return to stricter enforcement policies. He praised Trump for attempting to restore common sense through border security and by removing DEI and CRT programs from federal agencies and the military. But Roy warned that this reprieve would not last unless lawmakers were willing to act with the same resolve shown by generations of Americans before them. Invoking the sacrifices of those who fought at Lexington and Concord, the Alamo, and Normandy, as well as soldiers who served in modern conflicts and police officers on the front lines, Roy said members of Congress should be willing to risk their political careers to defend the nation's future. He argued that true leadership meant placing the safety and freedom of Americans above electoral security or political expediency. This is about whether we are willing to stand up and defend the greatest country the world has ever known, Roy said, closing his speech with an urgent appeal to colleagues to act decisively. He insisted that if lawmakers fail to resist radical ideologies and to restore security, future generations would be left without the American dream that previous generations fought and died to preserve.